Good evening. Good evening, everyone. Could you please take your seats for the dinner, which will be preceded by our special address. I'm very pleased to welcome you, the delegates, to the 5th IISS Fullerton Forum, the Shangri-La Dialogue Sherpa meeting for 2017, to this evening's dinner, which will be preceded by an important special address from Delfin Lorenzana, the 36th Secretary of National Defense of the Philippines. Secretary Lorenzana had a long career as a professional military officer and in diplomatic capacities before he was appointed to his present role in the middle of last year by incoming President Duterte. He was a member of the Philippine Military Academy class of 1973. He held command and staff positions in the Philippine Army, serving as commander of a Scout Ranger Company, Scout Ranger Battalion, and a Light Armored Brigade, and as Army Special Operations Commander. His final post as a serving officer was as Defense and Armed Forces Attaché to the United States. He was subsequently appointed as Special Presidential Representative for Veterans Affairs and head of the Office of Veteran Affairs at the Philippine Embassy in Washington, where he played a central role in supporting the demand of Filipino veterans for compensation from the U.S. government for their wartime service. As Secretary of National Defense, Mr. Lorenzana has wide-ranging responsibilities. The armed forces of the Philippines remain actively engaged in counterinsurgency and counter-terrorist operations, most importantly, perhaps against the Abu Sayyaf group, a notorious and hyper-violent terrorist-cum-criminal kidnapping for ransom gang operating in Jolo and Basilan in the Sulu archipelago. At the same time, he is overseeing a continuing effort to modernize the capabilities of the armed forces in the face of a challenge to the Philippines' maritime interests. And of course, as Secretary, he is responsible also for the Philippines' defense cooperation arrangements with a wide range of countries, including other members of ASEAN, as well as major powers. Secretary Lorenzana, I know that what has been reported over the last half year regarding potential changes in the Philippines' strategic orientation will interest our delegates here tonight. But I know that there are other things that are very important that you'd like to talk about. I understand that the focus for your address tonight will be on ASEAN. ASEAN will celebrate its 50th anniversary this year, while the Philippines occupies the chairing position in the association. The question of ASEAN is absolutely central to any discussion of regional security matters, so it's really excellent from our perspective that you're going to address that topic, and we look forward very much to hearing what you have to say. Mr. Secretary, the floor is yours. Thank you very much.
Mr. Tim Huxley, ladies and gentlemen, good evening. First of all, let me thank IISS for inviting me to speak to you tonight at this dinner. I am deeply honored by your invitation. Now, my suspicion was actually confirmed that I was invited here to speak about some of the pronouncement by my president for the past 6 months regarding pertaining to China, the U.S., Russia, Japan, and a host of other things, including the Hague ruling. I'm very sorry to disappoint you, but I will not talk about those. This year, the Philippines will host the 50th anniversary of ASEAN as its chairman. You might wonder what we plan to do given this important milestone. In this period of geopolitical and economic uncertainty, it is a good time both to reflect back and look forward to the next 50 years of ASEAN. When taking stock of things, you all would agree that it is important to consider both the positive and the negative, in this case, both praise and criticism of the ASEAN. When talking about the ASEAN in all its positive light, I would venture no further than in the writings of a Filipino social scientist, whom colleagues in this region called Miss ASEAN herself, the late Dr. Estrella Solidom. Writing from the perspective of one who was present in the beginning of ASEAN in 1967, while looking back to what it had become in almost 4 decades, she wrote in 2003, with the highest commitment to its goals of peace, freedom, stability, prosperity, rule of law, and security, unwavering observance of all the principles which it had adopted from its establishment, and constantly mindful of the need for newer and appropriate strategies and building blocks to achieve the aspirations of the people. ASEAN has remained vibrant and relevant as the 21st century has begun. ASEAN has been able to respond and adapt to the changing conditions at the regional and international levels in coherent ways. ASEAN has engaged more friends and partners in all its cooperative endeavors, and within itself, the members have remained cohesive. The ideal of ASEAN towards which it is moving in the 21st century is summed up in its ASEAN Vision 2020, which is a concert of Southeast Asian nations, outwardly looking, living in peace, stability, and prosperity, bonded together in partnership, in development, and in a community of caring societies. This, of course, is in stark contrast to the observations of an Australian professor of government, Mr. David Martin Jones, who wrote rather unflatteringly just 2 years earlier before Ms. Solidom did his piece in 2001. He said, and I quote, "The ASEAN is neither a security nor an economic community, either in being or in prospect. It is in fact an imitation community. Such insecurity translated to a regional level produces a rhetorical and institutional shell. The shell delivers declarations, holds ministerial meetings, and even supports a secretariat. But beyond the flatulent musings of aging autocrats or postmodern constructivist pontificating in tracto fora, nothing of substance eventuates." Wow. Not a great friend of ASEAN, this Mr. Jones. Yeah. I say that somewhere in the middle of these two opposing descriptions strikes the most accurate description of where the ASEAN is. One must therefore be careful not to be beguiled by the rosiness of the former, nor utterly be discouraged by the sheer contempt of the latter. I, for one, agree with Dean Kishore Mahbubani in his book when he said that we should highlight ASEAN as a successful model of regionalism. After all, ASEAN is one of the most economically dynamic and culturally diverse regions in the world. It is also a relatively peaceful region despite having large numbers of Muslims, Buddhists, Christians, and Taoists peacefully coexisting with each other. Much of this has been the result of cooperation among ASEAN members. We cannot say this for other parts of the world, which, ironically, are even less heterogeneous. But I must weigh this also against the keen observation of another illustrious compatriot of mine, the National Security Advisor of former President Fidel Ramos, General Jose Almonte. In an address to the first ASEAN People's Assembly in Batam Island, Indonesia in November 2000, he said that ASEAN must be able to relate to the daily lives of ordinary Southeast Asians to enable them to feel that they, too, own the Southeast Asian community. Thus, under the chairmanship of the Philippines, we will highlight ASEAN as a successful model of regionalism and continue to foster efforts to show proof that indeed this continues to be so. We will ensure that ASEAN will remain united and relevant in the next 50 years amidst the growing superpower rivalry in the region, economic slowdown, natural disasters, looming threats from terrorism, piracy, and illegal drugs. During President Duterte's remarks in his hometown of Davao City for the launching of our country's ASEAN chairmanship the other week, he laid down 6 thematic priorities. Number 1, a people-oriented, people-centered ASEAN. Number 2, peace and stability in the region. Number 3, maritime security and cooperation. Number 4, inclusive, innovation-led growth. Number 5, a resilient ASEAN. And number 6, ASEAN as a model of regionalism and as a global player. These 6 themes hope to contribute to further strengthening the 3 pillars of ASEAN, namely the ASEAN Economic Community, the ASEAN Socio-Cultural Community, and the ASEAN Political Security Community. As the head of our country's defense portfolio, I am most especially interested on the ASEAN Political Security Community pillar. It is in this context where our regional institutions centered around ASEAN play an important role. For one, these mechanisms to include the ASEAN Defense Ministers Meeting, or what we call ADMM, and the ADMM Plus enable regional countries to cooperate in addressing the various security challenges I have previously identified. For another, ASEAN-centered institutions provide ASEAN a platform for engaging the major powers on the one hand and serve as venues where the major powers engage one another on the other hand. It is believed that by engaging them and with their engagement through these platforms, the strategic competition that is becoming apparent among them should result in productive efforts for the region instead of regional conflict and instability. The promotion of practical cooperation indeed enables regional states to address security challenges and at the same time contribute in the building of a security community in Southeast Asia and the wider Asia-Pacific. The ADMM Plus experts working groups on counter-terrorism continues to explore ways to address violent extremism in the region. Meanwhile, the trilateral cooperation among the Philippines, Indonesia, and Malaysia, which is meant to address the growing threat of violent extremism, piracy, and kidnappings in the areas of common concern among our 3 countries, is undertaken within the ambit of ASEAN. The newly established working group on cybersecurity is likewise meant to promote practical cooperation among the ADMM Plus members in addressing the growing challenge posed by cybersecurity threats. And let me take this opportunity to express our appreciation to all members of the ADMM Plus for supporting this proposal from the Philippines. On humanitarian assistance and disaster relief, the ADMM established the Asian Defense Establishment and civil society organizations cooperation on non-traditional security and the ASEAN Militaries Ready Group, ASEAN Center of Military Medicine, to strengthen civil military coordination and enhance capacity and capability in the aftermath of disasters. The complex challenges in the maritime domain necessitate that we are able to communicate directly with our fellow defense ministers, not only to diffuse tension that may arise, but to enable us to quickly act during emergencies. Thus, the direct communication link in the ADMM Plus, in the ADMM process would certainly be useful. At the end of the day, we should continue to ensure that the mechanisms we have put in place are effective and our actions are optimally undertaken. It is with this trust in mind that a great number of our endeavors as the Philippines chairs the ADMM and the ADMM Plus this year revolve around the idea of streamlining and rationalizing both our structures and processes. Let me convey our appreciation for the support for this trust I have gathered from my fellow defense ministers in the previous interactions I have had with them, whether as a group or individually. I look forward to your support as we embark on this difficult yet necessary task of rationalizing all our efforts as the Philippines chairs ASEAN this year. What does it mean for ASEAN to become a global player? Let me suggest three things. First, as the host to the leaders of the US, China, Japan, Russia, and India, we will have to remind our friends, firmly if necessary, not to use ASEAN as a proxy for their rivalry. We will reaffirm the unity and solidarity of ASEAN amidst this emerging superpower competition. We will also work for the finalization of a binding code of conduct on South China Sea. Second, President Duterte has been invited to attend the meetings of BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. This will be an opportunity for him to represent the economic and security interests of ASEAN in this important major powers grouping. Third and finally, allow me to suggest to IISS, if I may, that it consider putting these two themes, ASEAN as a model of regionalism and ASEAN as global player, as one of the topics of the discussion for this year's Shangri-La Dialogue. This is a historic moment for ASEAN, and I hope that IISS would help the Philippines convey these two important messages. A little over 19 years ago in Kuala Lumpur, we pledged to our peoples our determination and commitment to bringing the ASEAN vision for the year 2020 into reality. We vowed then, as we continue to pledge now, to make our region a concert of Southeast Asian nations, a partnership in dynamic development, a community of caring societies, and outward-looking ASEAN. This year, as our country looks ahead to its role of steering the ASEAN as its chairman, and while we look back to our first 50 years, we hope that the bricks we would have laid by the end of the year bring us closer to our collective desire for the year 2020. Only then could we set the right tone for what should become the ASEAN for the next 50. Thank you and good evening.
Thank you very much, Mr. Secretary. That was great. Thank you, Mr. Secretary, for your excellent special address in which I think you provided a realistic and balanced assessment of ASEAN's contemporary challenges and perhaps more importantly the potential of ASEAN to contribute even more strongly to regional security cooperation. And it's certainly important at the present time for ASEAN to display solidarity and a willingness on the part of its members to pursue new initiatives. And thank you especially for the very precise recommendation that you made to us in the IISS regarding the place that ASEAN might find in the next Shangri-La Dialogue, and we'll certainly look at that and we'll look at that seriously and see what's possible, because we're certainly interested in trying to frame discussions about security collaboration and the potential for new forms of cooperation amongst regional states, and it's clear that ASEAN does and will continue to play a central part in that. You very kindly agreed to take some questions from our delegates, yeah. And I thought now I could ask our delegates to raise their hands if there's anything that they'd like to ask you. Dino Patijalal from the Foreign Policy Community of Indonesia.
Thank you, Secretary, and welcome to the Fullerton Dialogue. I want to ask you a question. as we reach 50 years, ASEAN, I wonder if it's not time for us to be honest in recognizing that as much as we have been able to promote good regionalism among the political leadership and also among the senior officials, we have not done a good job in grassrooting ASEAN. I'm from Indonesia, and we've gone to the provinces in Indonesia, and I can say that no more than 1% of Indonesians know what the ASEAN economic community is. I do this because every time I go down the campus, I ask them, anyone know about ASEAN economic community? You know, hardly I get a hands up answer. I asked a Malaysian leader, how about in Malaysia? How many in Malaysia know about ASEAN economic community? Say less than 5% probably. And if you go all around ASEAN, I don't know about Singapore, but you would get around the same number. And the ASEAN economic community is revealing because that's supposed to be the sector where there's more juice compared to the economic and socio-cultural community. I hardly see billboards in ASEAN countries campaigning about ASEAN. So the question is, I think, in the next 50 years, ASEAN is not going to be relevant unless it is really understood to be, as you said, part of their daily lives, that it is relevant to them. In fact, my group is launching a campaign this year to celebrate ASEAN 50 by asking the young people, how can ASEAN be relevant to them, instead of asking how great ASEAN is. So my question to you is really, how do we do this? How do we grassroots ASEAN as well as we have been able to promote healthy regionalism among the political elites and the leadership? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dino.
That's a good question, actually. I haven't gone around asking our people if they know about ASEAN. Maybe if I do what you did, I would come up with the same percentage or even lower. People in the provinces do not know about these groupings, actually. And if I go back to the statement of General Monte that the Southeast Asian community should be able to own or to be able to own the ASEAN community or even prosperity, then we have to work harder. Maybe to educate our people, go down to the grassroots levels, and educate our people about this ASEAN and how it is contributing to the security of the area, to the region, and actually contributing to their prosperity as well if there is no conflict in the region. You're right. So maybe that should be one of our thrust in the next couple of years. Maybe we should start here during our chairmanship to include how to filter down ASEAN, the thought, or cascade down the ASEAN to the grassroots levels. I think the individual countries will be able to do their own program to do that, that fits their culture and their society. Thank you for that question.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. I think it is a very important question, and it's ASEAN is not the only regional grouping facing a challenge like this. As you know, there was a vote in the United Kingdom in the middle of last year on whether or not the UK should remain a member of the European Union. And apparently, after the day after the vote, the most Googled question in the UK was, what is the European Union? So I hope that ASEAN will never fall into that sort of syndrome. Next question, please. Ambassador Ong Keng Yong.
Thank you, Tim.
Former Secretary General of ASEAN.
Thank you. I thought I should break the ice a little bit more. Excellency, you have given us a very good summary of what your country plan to do. But I am very fond of ASEAN Regional Forum. So I thought maybe I would just push you a little bit and maybe ask what particular area you think the ARF can do for the coming 1 year, especially we are all celebrating the 50th anniversary of ASEAN. Thank you, sir.
Well, the Asian Regional Forum is actually a yearly event that the ministers, I think, participated in by the foreign ministers. I think what they could do is to continue crafting something that would diffuse the tensions in the South China Sea. Five of the ASEAN members are also claimants in that area, and they have been trying to craft a code of conduct for the past many years, but they haven't been successful. And we will try to do that this year. Maybe exert some more effort into having this code of conduct, because the tension in that part of the world is rising, and we don't want that to happen. Yeah. Especially so that about 5 trillion worth of goods pass to that area every year. And so that's one of the areas that we are going to focus on the Asian Regional Forum. And maybe others that our Foreign Affairs Secretary will be crafting as we go along. We are only in the first month of our chairmanship, and we're still developing some of the topics and interactions that we will have with the member countries. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. Sir, could I ask you a question? As Secretary of National Defense, what is the most important challenge that you face?
The most important challenge that I face is actually how to maintain peace and order in my country. Now, I am facing this pestering problem of criminality in our southern seas. We have a group of terrorists in central Mindanao that are actually creating trouble, and we have been trying hard to defeat them, to finish them off, but we just can't do the job because there are lots of civilians in the area. We are prevented from doing an all-out war against them. They fight guerrilla-like war offensive with us. They fight and then just melt in the countryside with the civilians. Now, we are trying to look at it in some other way, maybe come up with a strategy. Yeah. We've done this before with the communist insurgency, and we were successful. We will try it again today, maybe this time. Talk to the local people, enlist the support of the local officials, up to the barangays, to the lowest level of unit of our government, and see how we can get them to cooperate with us, because especially in Hulo. In Hulo, where most of the kidnapped victims are being kept now, there are, I think, 25 kidnapped victims still being kept there. They just released 2 Indonesians recently, and we heard that the company that employed them paid 20 million pesos. That's a lot of money. So it seems that the whole of the community are into it. Not everybody, but a major part of the community are actually benefiting from the ransom that are being paid to them. So that's one. Number 2 is we would like to maybe, if we can only convince the people there that this kidnapping is not helping them or helping everybody there in that community. they will be better off in the long run. Number two is to convince those, the companies or the families not to pay ransom. Not to pay a ransom, because every time they pay a ransom, then they make the kidnappers stronger. They have more money to distribute to the communities, and they have more money to procure all the gadgets that they need, the cell phones, firearms, and even these materials to manufacture the improvised explosive devices. And third is, this was actually one of the topics that was done by the president before, is to bring in development in the area. Maybe infrastructure or roads, ports, incentives for the people to go fishing rather than go kidnapping. So we are thinking of this holistic approach once and for all. Now, a lot of Filipinos are advocating the president to declare martial law over these three islands, South Tawi-Tawi, Hulu, and Basilan, and maybe part of Mindanao. But I don't think we have reached the point where we need to declare martial law yet. So it's a very controversial move by the president if he declares martial law. I think that is not defensible in Congress or in the Supreme Court, so he's not entertaining that idea, but there are talks every now and then about martial law. So that's what we're doing, team, here. We're trying to approach it in some other way than the conventional search and destroy tactics of the army.
It's a big challenge.
Yes, a big challenge. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Sir, Richard Hedarian.
Secretary, I had a question. Richard Darian from the Philippines. I'll excruciatingly avoid asking a question about President Digong, but may I ask your opinion about your assessment about the direction of the South China Sea disputes? You have made a lot of strong statements on the topic in the past few weeks. And what do you think should the role of ASEAN be this year at its 50th anniversary in terms of reasserting its centrality in dealing with the number one security issue for a lot of people in this part of the world? Thank you.
Well, for one, I think ASEAN should be united in in trying to craft maybe a regime or agreement with the other claimant powers there. We should be united. We should be putting up one voice in support of whatever the ASEAN will do in that area. Now, the policy, the first policy that the President Duterte said have done when the ruling came out in July 12 is to have a dialogue with the Chinese, with the government of China, and that's what he did. To not be very aggressive in having the ruling implemented, because after all, China said it will not honor the ruling. So he said, and this is what he said to us: we are going to talk to the Chinese so that we will go back to the status quo before that our fishermen can go back and fish, because their livelihood has been affected, those people who are going there. To talk to the Chinese that this problem cannot be solved now because there are irreconcilable differences. They claim it's theirs, we claim it's ours. So it's actually a loggerhead who owns what. They don't want to honor the ruling. The on clause is there that favors us. The ruling favored us. But they said that they do not honor that because they have historical rights over the service up to this Nandas line. Well, during their talks, I am not privy to the talks between my president and Xi Jinping, but I have a sense that what they have talked is that we will postpone discussing the issue of who owns what for later. Maybe later in this term or later by the next generation, and maybe we could just manage these issues. Now, we cannot solve the dispute, but we can manage them for the benefit of everybody. Now there are talks that maybe we should agree to a joint development of the area to exploit the hydrocarbons beneath in those areas. We haven't done anything concrete to implement those proposals, but it's being talked about in the Philippines. Yeah. So that's what we are doing here in the South China Sea. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Secretary. I think, unfortunately, it's now time to bring this session to a close because I think our delegates are probably feeling a little bit hungry, but I'd like to thank you very much for answering those questions so frankly. And again, thank you, Mr. Secretary, for your really excellent special address on a really important topic, and I hope we can continue the discussions over dinner. Thank you very much again.
Thank you. Thank you.